Welcome to Money Matriarchs with Dr. Laura Mattia, where we inspire you to harness the power of money for good. Together, we will hear motivational stories, meet encouraging role models, and explore financial strategies that can make a difference in our lives, our families, and beyond. We're in this together. Now, please welcome your host, Dr. Laura.
Today's Money Matriarch is Wendy Ingram. She is a PhD in molecular and cell biology and the co-founder and CEO of Dragonfly Mental Health, a nonprofit dedicated to cultivating excellent mental health among academics worldwide. She's also a research scientist dedicated to understanding the underlying biology of mental illness through research and dismantling the stigma against the illness through advocacy, education, and systemic change. Wendy, I'm so glad you could join us. Thank you for being here.
It's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yes. Well, we have a lot to talk about because I would like to. When we talk about building wealth and developing plans, the underlying goal for most people is not really to die with a pile of money, right? And we've talked about that, and you know that I like to actually get down to people's overall motivation. When women think about money, sometimes they'll think, it's boring, it's not interesting, it's not something I need to be involved in. But when we can reposition it as, no, this is a tool to achieve your goals and your values and live your life purpose. Money takes on a whole nother meaning. Money and time are our two most valuable resources. So we talked a little bit. You actually participated with me where we were going through our values and what our values are. Can you talk about the value that actually got you involved in finding Dragonfly? It's a global organization, and also taking the role of CEO.
Sure. The values exercise was just so wonderful and so interesting. So I highly recommend that to anyone else. You made us narrow it all down to 5 values, right? And the thing the value that led me to take on this role of CEO of this global organization really is a few of them kind of bound all up together.
That's wonderful.
Honestly.
Good.
The first one is helping others. So that is a very core aspect of what I think certainly myself and my position in the world and what drives me is driven by. That's the motor, is this desire to help others. Action is my coping mechanism, is one of the things that I say. And I mean it. It is any time I feel a little helpless or frustrated, or I see injustices being done, or I see how we could lift each other up better. Helping others is that value that is just the motor behind this boat that drives me forward. But there are 2 other things that really launched me into this role. One was adventure.
Okay.
I have been described by people that have mentored me over the years consistently as fearless. And I think that fearlessness is related to my value of adventure, of newness, of exploring unknown territories, and creating something new that no one has ever created before. I don't back down from, and in fact, I'm very attracted to spaces where, why isn't anyone doing this yet? This should be done.
Right.
And I think that those things in combination really set me up for taking on this role. And then the third thing that I chose as a value was flexibility. And as I was exploring these, I never jump in preemptively. I always do my research. And so I really tried very, very hard to find out what it meant to take on the role of founder and CEO of a nonprofit. And the vast majority of CEOs of nonprofits that I spoke to said, don't start a nonprofit.
Right.
It's so hard. You wear so many hats. It is so challenging. Everything is different day to day. And, they kind of listed all these things. And I have a value of flexibility, though, is roll with the punches.
Mm-hmm.
Just be ready for anything and never let a setback or someone saying no or massive changes in support or engagement or funding or anything slow you down. Just adapt.
It's so interesting, actually, because I know for myself, I started doing this. I called it Women's Money Empowerment, and it was a program for women to just call in a hotline and talk, ask some simple questions about, what should I do to get out of debt? Those kinds of things. And I was told, do not actually. I started the process of filing for a 501c3. And I was told over and over again, do not do this. This is a problem. Can't you actually find another organization? And so I wound up bringing it to the Women's Resource Center. And it's just a program at the Women's Resource Center, which is a not for profit, but it's embedded in there. So you didn't listen to them.
No, I listened very deeply to them.
Okay.
And I think that when I asked the follow-up questions, that's where I got the game plan. That's where I got the critical pieces of information to help me anticipate where the problems might come from. And ultimately, I ended up going to my business focused friends and people, one of whom was one of our very first supporters of Dragonfly Mental Health, was a friend of mine who was a vice president at Google and a venture capitalist, and like he knew the most about money and business and starting organizations and world impact that I could imagine. And I sat down with him and I explained what I thought we would do and how we would start and how we would go about things initially and longer term plans. And I was like, so talk me out of this. And he said, I'm writing you a check.
Oh, wonderful.
So not that he's the only person that convinced me, but that was a seminal piece of being convinced that what we were doing, what we were thinking, and what resources and ideas we had to start with were the right ideas.
So clear. I mean, and I really want to get into exactly what Dragonfly is all about and so forth. But since you were going down that area, I just wanted to ask you, what were they telling you? For anybody that's listening right now that's thinking about starting a nonprofit, what were the biggest hurdles that they told you or tried to kind of divert you there?
Let's see. Oh gosh, that's going back 5 years now. So
okay.
One of the major problems is money, I think. And almost all of the people who I was speaking to who are running nonprofits actually were women. So this relates back to your mission, your research, your everything you know about it is there are so many women that want to do good in the world and can and are brilliant about it. But we, and maybe you can give us a mini lecture on what are the elements that result in women being so uncomfortable with asking for money, managing money, planning around money, needing it, because you need it in order to do the good you want to see in the world. You have to have it. It is your time is wonderful. And we have tons of time from brilliant, wonderful people at Dragonfly. We have 450 volunteers from 50 different countries and all manner of disciplines. It's truly incredible. And they are a driving force, but that's not going to run Dragonfly. We have to also have donors, individuals, grants. We have to have a revenue model to be able to sustain ourselves, to be able to handle different changes that might come out of nowhere. Like right now, academia has been used to having a lot of overhead from grants from the US government, and no one expected this to happen, but all of a sudden Johns Hopkins is having to lay people off because they are bent. They're all of their eggs are in a particular basket, and it comes down to money. They're such an important and powerful and wonderful and brilliant organization, but they just got an email yesterday saying that without overhead, without sustainability, without knowing when or if we're really going to be able to fight these moves being made to cut our funding, our public health research is going to take a massive hit, and you have to keep the lights on. That you have to be able to retain the most amazing and wonderful people who clean out the trash every night, like you, all the way to, you know, the expensive and important equipment for the research that's being done in those halls that can't be bought by one grant or one lab. It has to come from these pooled resources.
Right.
So it's really, I don't know, it'd be really fascinating to hear a little bit.
Well, that's the whole thing. And I think you're kind of answering it. If some people are listening to you, you're answering the question. It really is all about truly believing in what you're doing. And so even for me, I work in the financial services industry, and there is a big range of the type of individual that works in the financial services industry. There are people that are pure salespeople, maybe haven't even taken a finance class in their life. They are selling a product, they're selling something to somebody. And then there are other people that are more finance. I'm a finance person. And I, for the longest time, would tell people, I'm not a salesperson, I'm a finance person. And what I found over time was that I believed so much in what I was doing that I would be selling. When you believe in what you're doing and you feel good about it and you know it's helpful and you know that you can help people, you will start advocating for that service. And people see that. And clearly, that gentleman saw your passion, that he was ready to write you a check. And that's really what it's about. It's about finding those things that have such meaning to us that it just the money becomes well, okay, how do I do this? I'm going to need money to help solve that problem. It's not so much just, oh, I'm just asking somebody for money so I can buy a coffee. No, you're asking them for money to do this great thing. And why wouldn't they want to give you money? They should want it. They should be begging you, can I please give you money? Because I know what you're doing is just so great that I want to do that. And I think somebody that wants to start a not-for-profit, that's probably the key, is getting, you know, how passionate are you about this? And I know that you're very passionate about what Dragonfly stands for.
Yeah.
Curious about what you were just saying about John Hodge. I'm not evaluating right or wrong about anything that's happening right now, but certain organizations have become very comfortable about just receiving money and not necessarily having to say, this is why we need that money. Don't just give it to me. This is why you should be giving it. So I think that they're going to have to reframe and go back and say, no, we're not just asking for money. This is what we're doing with that money. And this is why you need to rethink giving us that money.
This speaks a lot to a few conversations I've just had recently with science writers and science communicators and people who, got their PhDs in some tiny little corner of science, that a marine biologist, for example, I just met with, who left her career because she realized that the research isn't enough. People have to know that it's important to do the research, and they have to know what the results are. And most critically, you have to complete the story. It's never a story. It's never a sale. Those two words could be interchangeable until you have an action.
Why is that research relevant? Why is it relevant? Yeah, absolutely.
So that was what motivated her, like me, to just, left turn from her research career and go into science writing and policy and communication about what is being done, what's being found, and what we should do about it. The most critical piece is that. And I think that we really have done ourselves a disservice as humanity in compartmentalizing people too much, specializing too much,
right,
and not having everyone know at least the basics of some of these things. And that's what we do at Dragonfly is we're countering the lack of mental health literacy, basic knowledge around mental health struggles and what it looks like and what can be done about it, and how community can play a role in preventing and supporting people who are struggling in scientific communities, in academic communities.
So the basis of Dragonfly is really the research that uncovered the problems. Can you talk a little bit about that research? What was the research that moved the needle and said, we need to do something about this?
Yes, thank you for asking. You know, for me initially it was a personal journey. When I've been fascinated by quality of life over quantity, the human mind and how you can be completely physically fit and live for your entire life, but if your entire life is struggling with a severe mental illness like major depression or bipolar disorder, unchecked and untreated, that is a miserable life. And but we can change that, we can interact with that, and we can it's environmental and it's genetic, it's both things playing a role in our environment, and we can do something about it. So why aren't we taking care of each other, and willing to take care of ourselves? It's hugely due to stigma. But where does stigma come from? It comes from lack of knowledge. It comes from the way certain people who are loudest in the environment are speaking, which may or may not be indicative of the wider community's thoughts and beliefs about things. But the loudest people tend to be the ones who dominate the culture. And so what really changed for me when I was studying psychology and biochemistry in undergrad, and then decided to go into basic science because I was like, knowledge, it's all about knowledge. I want to know more about the biology of these illnesses and the mechanisms of the treatments. And then I went to Berkeley and we lost someone in our community to suicide. And then it wasn't about the knowledge at all. It was about the community. It was about the lack of planning, the lack of thinking ahead of how do we support each other? How do we prevent these things from even happening in the first place? And when I went to my postdoc, which I was still in the research route, and I studied psychiatric epidemiology, I was finally exposed to the kind of research that we're deploying today at Dragonfly, which is prevention. It's public health. It's taking this huge step back and looking at all the details and the big picture at the same time, and then figuring out how to overlay those two things together and create change that's going to be preventative. And so that's what we're doing at Dragonfly.
Can you give an example?
Sure. The thing that I found most inspiring right off the bat was working with psychiatrists and public health kind of researchers there in the Department of Mental Health. They had collaborated to create an adolescent depression awareness program and showed very, very clearly that if you're going to try to prevent suicide, specifically the most tragic loss from these deadly illnesses, and they were focusing on high school, middle school age individuals and populations. But what they showed more concretely than anybody else was that if you actually want to prevent suicide, you have to treat the underlying mental illness, the depression or the bipolar disorder or the anxiety disorder that might be this person might be struggling with.
Does that mean drugs?
No, it can be drugs. It can also be psychotherapy. But if you in order to treat those illnesses, no matter what modality is appropriate for the individual, for their choices, for their biology, their circumstances, if you treat that, in order to treat them, they have to be willing to go to treatment. Right. So that you have to go upstream again, another step, and say they have to know what the signs of depression are in themselves and in others. They have to be willing to disclose this to the right people, especially young kids who don't know. They're just figuring everything out, right? They're so dependent on their families and their friends and their teachers and their coaches and whatever kinds of activities they're in. Those are the people that are wanting to help them. But if they are not willing to come out and tell them that they're struggling, that they've had a big change in their behavior or their feelings or their interests or their sleep or their appetite, they won't even know. They won't be willing to go. So you have to go all the way upstream to building better awareness
Right.
and decreasing the stigma in order to actually save lives. And that is the model that Dragonfly is initially built off of, but adapted to academics.
Okay, that's a tough road because so you're almost having to identify those people most prone towards depression, or do you just put yourself out there and say, here we are, you could need us.
Yeah. Well, so we don't do clinical care. We don't do a connection to resources or identify people at highest risk. That's not the
Okay.
modality we use.
Okay.
There are those out there, and that's wonderful and very, very good. But what we're doing is more akin to, well, let me add one more piece of research to the puzzle. I
Okay.
wasn't involved in this, but it came out at another very critical time when in 2018, a study was published looking at thousands of graduate students at many different schools in Europe and the US. And what they found was that the rates of depression and anxiety among graduate students was 6 to 8 times the rates of the general population.
Why?
So it's not only about finding the needle in the haystack of who might be struggling, it's literally half the group that's struggling. So we actually don't have to do this, let's screen and find the individuals. It is all about more of a CPR style approach, where if the more people in the community who know CPR, not everybody has to know CPR, but they don't have to know when someone's going to have a heart attack or choke or almost drown or have, whatever else is going on. They just need to know CPR, and you need someone in the room to know CPR
Right.
and be able to do this, not save their life, and get them to full recovery, not to do heart surgery there in the room, but to be a peer, to be a person in the community with a very critical skill that can be deployed anytime under any appropriate circumstance. And you now have massively more people surviving than without a
Right.
CPR kind of general population approach.
You may not know the answer to this, but is there a specific fields that these people, I mean, is it just all those studying?
All academia. It is all academia. There's a study that was done at all the graduate programs throughout the UC system, the University of California system. They've got like 9 campuses or something. And they found that I think the rates were around 50% had current experiences of symptoms of depression, but it was higher among the humanities, actually, but it was very, very high in every field. But it
Wow.
was highest among humanities.
Do you have a theory on why? Like, is it the isolation of the work, or is it
Isolation. So there's two elements. There's some universal principles that are absolutely true. So it's extremely high pressure. It's extremely poorly paid. Usually you have people in their, earliest years, if their counterparts, if their classmates from high school finished undergrad but didn't go on to graduate programs, they're making a lot of money.
Right.
And the graduate students or the medical students or the nursing students, may ultimately have a higher earning potential. Some do, but some don't. If you go into general practitioner, just among medicine, if you go into general practitioner, you're often $200,000 or more in debt, and will struggle to pay that off over the next 30 years. Whereas if you go into neurosurgery, which takes another 13 years of training or so, you may be making $500,000 a year, and then you can pay that off and live a very luxe life. But it's highly variable as far as the finance goes. But when you're in graduate school or going into debt doing professional school for law school or medical school or nursing, you are in a difficult state, and financial distress and is tough. And you're not only not building wealth, you're losing it often or building debt. So those are very difficult issues. But the isolation is extremely high, especially depending on what field you're in. People who work in the field, ecologists or anthropologists, will go out on field missions and often be one or two or a very small handful of people that they're interacting with for months at a time. Mathematicians will often just lock themselves in a room. They're surrounded by people in the community, but what they do is they spend hours upon hours and hours on their study, on their thing. I spent some of my research experiments, I spent 16 hours in a whole day, never with another person in the room.
Yep, I remember those days.
That it's intense. And
yes,
study, all of these things.
Yeah, and I
contribute
suppose
to it.
also even just the whole process, you're constantly having to prove yourself. You constantly have to deal with rejection of whether you're trying to get something published, whether you're trying to deal with even just getting your dissertation through, or there's all these reasons why you're not going to be successful, and you have to prove that you are.
Yes.
So I could imagine. So I'm one of those just very determined people. I'm always like, what do you mean I can't do this? Like I just push through. But I imagine that if you don't have that personality, it can be difficult for people.
Well, and this is the thing, is that you do have to have some certainly level of intelligence, which intelligence is actually by itself related to higher rates of anxiety and depression and bipolar disorder, and much lower rates of help seeking for those conditions.
That's empirical.
That is empirical. That is
okay.
Isolated
I thought so,
by itself.
but I didn't know that was shown.
Yeah.
Okay.
So higher IQ studies have demonstrated that link. It's correlation, but it's there.
Right.
And if anyone's interested in the references, I'd be more than happy to provide them. Just reach out. But then in addition to that, there's elements that of passion and perseverance and obsession and personality traits like neuroticism kind of start correlating in certain fields. Like there's actually really fascinating, this is a side note, not about academics, but about pilots. Pilots have one of the most striking personality profiles that is just recapitulated no matter what set of pilots you look at. They tend to have the same pattern of kind of an extreme, very specific pattern of personality traits.
Really?
But there's studies out there for that, but it's really fascinating. So I think that there's certain careers or certain pursuits that attract a kind of person, because honestly, the vast majority of people would not be willing to dissect 5,000 fruit fly brains for the pursuit of trying to cure Alzheimer's. Right. They're like, everyone wants Alzheimer's to be cured, but what percentage of the population is actually capable of, let alone willing to do that level of work? Grueling. It is truly grueling and sometimes mind-numbing work, but you have to be so passionate about finding the answer and improving the world as we know it, and recognize the connection between the two.
With a lot of uncertainty, you don't even know if your results are ever going to amount to anything.
100%. And that's another element, is that inherent in, and I know the most about basic biomedical researchers and scientists, but whatever field you're in or you care about, if you're in the arts or film, like you have to take risks to do the exciting new innovative things that we all do, no matter what your field is. And you have to be ready for and resilient to failure, constant failure. and
Right.
constant criticism, because the training inherently is people who are smarter than you, better than you, more successful than you, constantly pointing out what you've done wrong.
Mhm.
That's how we grow. That's how we develop. That's how we become better. So the fortitude of the person who is able to make it through a graduate program, whether it be master's or PhD or a professional program, just baseline has to be very, very
Mhm.
high. But what they're being subjected to on a daily, weekly, monthly, year after year basis is very, very tough. Another thing is community, though.
Mm.
The academic often, very, very often, has to leave their support system, leave their family, leave their community, and move somewhere else every 5 years or so until
Mm.
they become an established professor, maybe,
Right.
and can stay in one place for longer. But that's often not for 40 years. They're 40 to 50 years old before they really are in one place for a long period of time. And that is incredibly destabilizing for
Right.
any person.
So, Wendy, before we discourage everybody from even pursuing advanced degrees, it is worthwhile, right?
It
If for
is.
those people that want to, I'm very driven. One of my motivators, my values is accomplishment.
Mhm.
I have the need to feel like
Mm.
I'm always accomplishing. And so for me, getting the PhD was very rewarding in itself. I didn't even care whether anybody knew about it. I just wanted it for myself.
Yeah.
So there are different things that motivate people for
Yes.
sure. And it
Yes.
is a worthwhile pursuit.
Yeah.
I have a question is when we talk about the mental health component of this and the problems, are there any gender specific differences?
Well, what's fascinating about it is actually that a lot of the studies show that the gender differences we see in the general population, for example, women tend to have twice the rates of major depression than men do. And this has been pointed at a few, many different kind of mostly hormonal potential issues,
Uh-huh.
because the difference is most prominent during the childbearing years, uh, post puberty and premenopausal. But those differences go away when you look at at the academic populations.
Oh,
So men
interesting.
and women both have the same level in many cases. People, however, with gender diversity or sexual orientation differences do tend to have higher rates of a little bit higher rates of various illnesses, especially depression, but not as much as in the general population. It's really quite telling, actually, of the pressure of the environment that everyone's being exposed to, because things specifically depression, no one is immune to developing it. There are a lot of, if you have it in your family, you're going to have a higher likelihood of potentially developing it. But genetics so far have not shown us any concrete will have depression if you have this set of genetic markers, nor are you completely resistant, and will never develop depression. Everyone is susceptible to it.
It's interesting. So, I have an undergraduate degree in psychology. So, with my little bachelor's degree, I therefore am an expert in psychology, right?
You and me both, right?
So, I've always had my own feelings about depression, where I always felt that okay, you're feeling depressed, go do something. Like, go do something for somebody else. Like, just get out
Mhm.
of yourself and go do something. And you would think, because of the work that they're doing in academia and the fact that they are helping other people and helping the world or contributing to the body of knowledge, whatever their focus, you would think that that would be enough to lift them. But you're actually saying that academia is actually a variable in being more depressed.
Well, there's there's a case for that.
Okay.
We haven't sorted that out. That's one of the things that I
Okay.
would love to do, but is not our number one priority to fund. But I would love to fund the research so
Okay.
that we can get at the basics and the really core understanding of what's driving what here,
Mhm.
and in this particular population, because they do have the potential to have an outsized influence on the world around them. Right?
Mhm.
These are your doctors, these are your
Absolutely.
lawyers, these are your financial advisors, these are people we go to with specialized knowledge and skills that we trust to help us in some of the toughest times of our lives.
Mhm.
And when COVID happened, who saved our lives?
Right.
It was the scientists. They
Yep.
came up with
Yep.
a vaccine in record time. It's unprecedented in humanity,
Mhm.
for us to have been able to fight off this natural phenomenon of a pandemic. It's amazing and beautiful, and it was people with pipettes. But they are. I would love to know the answer to that. But I think that what we're focusing on is really the obvious unnecessary stressors.
Okay.
So we work with communities directly to find out where they're at, what are they struggling with most, and it varies from place to place, country to country, field to field.
Mhm.
So we have to adapt and be very customizable for working with astrophysicists versus field biologists, like
Right.
very different.
Right.
Working
Right.
with a telescope versus being in the jungle, different needs and stressors. But what are the unnecessary stressors? And so those are the things that we try to tackle and work with them to address. And one of the most unnecessary stressors is the stigma that prevents people from seeking care at what you are talking about, the early stages.
Right.
So what ends up happening with the vast majority of people I kind of interact with and talk to is that you don't develop depression overnight. You start having some symptoms, you ignore those symptoms or compartmentalize it or adapt or push through. But it keeps getting worse because it's a biologically driven illness. It's environmentally influenced, but it's biologically driven. And so once that, whatever that cascade is, starts you down that path towards depression, if the impulse is to ignore it, if the impulse and the pressure from society is to pretend you're not having any problems, then you don't seek out care, you don't seek out help when you could. And before you know it, you have stage 4 cancer, but of the mind.
Right.
And that is where prevention and public health and screening has saved countless hundreds of thousands of people's lives by screening for prostate cancer, by screening for breast cancer. The people we know and love in our lives, every single person knows someone who survived cancer because they caught it early. And tragically, a lot of us know people who we've lost because they caught it too late.
Right.
We have to move everything upstream. That's our approach.
Right. And I mean, it's interesting. We're primarily focused on mental health, but the things that you're talking about do manifest themselves in physical. There are a lot of people that I know that have said to me, I know when I got cancer. It was when I was going through this very stressful period or whatever, and it just triggered the illness. So, I mean,
or it directly, stress directly impacts your immune system. So I trained in my PhD in molecular and cell biology, but my specialties were in genetics and immunology.
okay.
And so I learned about the immune system, and I was studying the brain and behavior, and I was studying a brain parasite that manipulates the behavior of the mammals that it infects. That's another podcast, another time. But what we were studying, what I was learning at that point was how intricately connected and easily influenced the body is, and the immune system, which is your innate defense, your innate and adaptive defense against all manner of illnesses. And stress depresses your immune system.
Right.
Actively, very specifically. We know exactly the molecular pathways. I won't bore your audience with it, but you can map it out of if you have chronic stress, if you have unremitting stress that you can't escape, that absolutely severely depresses your immune system. And your immune system is what's responsible for taking out all of the cancer cells that pop up constantly. We all have cancer cells,
Yes.
but your immune system is what is your primary and most effective defense against it.
Yes. I wish that there would be more conversation about that just in general. I wish some of the things that I put myself through when I worked in New York City and, got up at 4:30 in the morning and came home at night and like the stress that I put myself through running up and down, from Wall Street to, uptown. I know that it damaged me. I know that every gray hair on my body is from that period of time. I know that.
This is from this day. This is from this other day.
And people would tell me, my mother would say, you really have to smell the roses. You need to calm down. You need to not do that to yourself. And I never really put two and two together on how much of a straight line it is between putting yourself through that and then becoming truly ill, not just having the flu, but actually having other things that happen. And I wish there would be more conversation about that, like not just about, oh, if you drink alcohol or if you smoke or if you eat sugar, people are starting to talk about that more, but they're not talking about the stress components.
Yes,
so
absolutely. And that's one of the most common conversations that I'll have with the most senior leaders in academic fields that I work with. So I very vividly just was transported to a conversation I was having with someone who leads a phenomenal molecular biology lab, and not just one lab, a whole campus. And he said he almost died of a heart attack, and he knows that it was due to the stress that he was ignoring and pushing through and not talking to anyone about and not dealing with. And it was a very fascinating conversation where his mental health, which is a spectrum, it's not just mental illness or crisis. We need to be talking about mental health on the whole spectrum, the same as we do physical health, and how they all link to each other as well. I agree completely.
The total body.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So do you meditate?
I do.
Okay, so do I.
I do. Yes. I started in, shocker for everyone, Berkeley, California, when I was in grad school. I got exposed to meditation there and started my practice then. And
I think
it was
didn't
amazing.
Transcendental Meditation start there? I do TM.
Maybe.
But,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. I didn't end up going the TM route. But it is one of the most well-researched of the traditions.
Yeah.
For sure.
I learned it my father brought me to learn it when I was 16.
Wow.
Back in a while ago.
Yeah.
I think he was influenced by the Beatles. I don't know.
Perfect. Love them.
So I was taught it, and then I kind of said, well, that's nice. And I didn't really use the technique at all for a long period of time. And then later on in life, I started doing it. And why did I just discard this? As it probably is the number one gift that my father gave me. Really, when I think about how he exposed me to that. And so I just wish I had started sooner. Yeah. Maybe I wouldn't have so many gray hairs.
Everyone's path is the path that they were meant to walk.
So your number one influence in your life, you have so much knowledge, passion, and wisdom. Who influenced you growing up?
I was so incredibly fortunate to have a just pantheon of powerful, brilliant, compassionate women in my life and in my family.
Wonderful.
And so my grandmother on my mom's side she grew up in very, very rural Northern California, and grew up on a farm, but education was very important to her and her family, and she excelled. And she was very much proud of her accomplishments. And she ended up being valedictorian of her 8th grade class, and then of her high school, and then getting her nursing degree at Cal Berkeley before it was differentiated into all the other campuses, before World War II. But all of that, educational leadership and attainment, I think she was president of her class. That's how my grandfather knew her when they were in high school together. He also served in World War II. But she ended up, when the war broke out, serving as not only in the Army Nurse Corps, but as a leader, as a
Wow, that's
lieutenant.
wonderful.
And she never made a huge deal about it when I was a very small child and growing up with her, but she was always taking care of everybody, always making sure that people had the food that they needed and the comfort that would make them feel at home, and tended her garden and had flowers in every single room in the house, and was just such a cultivator of space and beauty and support, and supported my mom and all of her brothers in whatever they wanted to pursue. So my mom was the brainiac of the group, and she wanted to be a veterinarian very early on, which was exceedingly unusual at the time.
Right.
It was 100% male dominated field, essentially, back in the 60s. And especially when she was a child, and said she wanted to go in, she loved animals. And this was just her pursuit and her passion. And my mom ended up just never ever giving up that desire, no matter how many people told her, no, you can't do that, or you shouldn't do that, or if you want to go into treatment or medicine, like be a real doctor, or be a, these were things she was told, not my beliefs. But I actually think that veterinarians are some of the most talented clinicians in the entire world, because they have to know how to do all manner of species and all
Right.
manner
And
of
compassionate,
things.
very compassionate
Very
people.
compassionate. Yeah.
Yeah.
And she ended up getting a vet degree after only 2 years of college,
Wow.
undergrad, and because she completed all of her courses that were prereqs and got in right away, and was one of 16 women out of a relatively large class at UC Davis, the top vet school in the nation. And she went on to become an exotics veterinarian. She wanted to really treat any and all animals, and
Wow.
especially birds. And one of the things that she influenced me for as well was, I actually didn't put this together until I did in fact found a nonprofit myself, was that my mom founded a nonprofit when we were all very, very small children. So in her own backyard, she and my dad built flight cages to rehab native Arizona wildlife, and specifically birds, because at the time, no one else was doing it. And she loved birds so much and just saw this need and was willing to donate the time and the resources and the physical space. But she ended up founding a nonprofit and attracting all of these other wonderful people who had deep compassion for native wildlife and birds and all kinds of things,
Wow.
and came to the cause. And they did the things that she couldn't do, like raise money.
That is wonderful. So you've had some strong role models in your life. That's great.
Yeah.
So hopefully when other women listen to your story, maybe they don't have the same role models, but hopefully they'll see some glimmers in some of the things that you've done, because you're doing wonderful things, Wendy. I'm really excited. I'm really excited to see where you take Dragonfly. I know you're still a young nonprofit.
We are. I would call us, at that, post startup, but pre sustainability. So we're looking for champions right now that want to work with us and for us, and help us become.
And what kind of people are you
truly-
looking for?
Yeah.
What are you looking for? How could, if somebody's listening to this and say, I'm very interested in supporting this organization, what types of things are you looking for?
Well, what you said at the very beginning is time is very, very helpful. Treasure
Okay.
or money is
Okay.
extremely helpful. And the connections that people have. So if you went to a university and know people there, you could introduce us to folks. And that is how we have interacted with any and all of our clients that we provide for services for fees, but also for free.
Okay.
And all of those, any university campus or graduate program or law school or business school, or if you know anyone on the provosts, or board of directors of universities, those are wonderful people to speak to and get connected with, so they can learn about what we're doing, and we can find out how we can help them depending on where they're at.
Okay, I might
Those are
have
all
a
great.
person or two.
Wonderful.
You mentioned before we got on the air that you recently got a grant working with a local university. And I'm thinking about that particular college has been going through a lot of transition and I think a lot of change. Is that something that might be a motivating factor, an organization that's particularly
Oh yeah, anyone who's interested locally in local support of what we can do. We are working with local colleges. Ringling College, we delivered some programs for their faculty recently. We're working with a number of campuses around here. Some of them more in the news than others, but we absolutely would love to help support them more, and they are not being supported by their administration across the board. So it's very, very hard right now. The changes that are happening all over the place, but certainly here as well, are feeling the insecurity, are feeling the stress, and so they need us now more than ever. So if people want to support local universities and those programs, they can reach out, and I can tell them specific ways that we can help them, either delivering individual programs, or our brand new program that we've developed is a deeply sustainable long-term approach where we're training campus champions to take what we do and embed it within their communities.
Oh, interesting.
So train the trainer programs are on the horizon, but we need supporters and people who can help in all manner of ways.
Fabulous. Okay. So if somebody wants to get a hold of you,
Yes.
What is the best way for them to reach you?
Email is fantastic. Wendy, WENDY, at dragonflymentalhealth.org. And that URL is also our website. So you can find out a lot more about us and who's involved and what we've done so far at dragonflymentalhealth.org as well.
Wonderful. Okay. So we're cheering you on, Wendy. I'm definitely wishing you the best of success. And another Money Matriarch for everybody to listen to. Thank you for listening. And until next time.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for joining us on this episode of Money Matriarchs with Dr. Laura Mattia. If you like what you've heard and found it helpful, please like and subscribe to the show so we can inspire all women to harness the power of money for good. Stay inspired, and we hope you'll join us again in the next episode of Money Matriarchs.